All right, I have Nelson Scott here, an author of a new book. You have a few books, right? But we're here to talk about this one specifically because you just launched it. I attended your book launch, so I was really happy to be there in person and get you to sign my book. Um, I have you here today because it's Thanksgiving this weekend, Canadian Thanksgiving, that is. And I really thought it would be important to, because gratitude is my mantra, my daily mantra. And I feel it's important to continuously have conversations about gratitude, whether it be, you know, between families, friends. But the one that we're going to be specifically talking about is gratitude in the workplace. But before we go into that subject, I would like to get to know a little bit more about Nelson. So please tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I guess I'll begin by saying I'm a former teacher, former school administrator, and system administrator.
Ah,
After 24 years, I left education and started doing some consulting work and training work,
hmm.
and that's where I've been for the last quite a few years now. It's getting to be a long time. Um, so you're probably going to ask me how I got interested in staff recognition as a topic. And
Yes.
that goes back, at least 20, probably years ago. I was in
Hmm.
Grand Prairie. I just done a day-long workshop for small businesses on how to hire staff. And someone at the end said, I have a question for you. This is a lot of work that you described to me. Why would I bother doing it if they just turn around and leave? My real question is, how do I keep them? So
Wow.
I wasn't sure. Well, I wasn't sure what he was looking for. Was I supposed to say pay him more or give him better
Yeah.
benefits or something like that? But I didn't answer that. I said, let them know they are appreciated.
Mm.
And luckily for me, he didn't say, and what do you mean by that? Because at that point, I probably didn't have, I couldn't have defined what I had in mind. But
Mm.
here we are a couple of decades later, and I think I have a better idea of how to express gratitude or appreciation or to say
Yeah.
thank you in the workplace.
Wow. So you must have did in that 20 years start doing research or just doing a lot of focus on gratitude in the workplace. Can you expand on that?
Certainly,
Hmm.
I read a lot to find out what
Hmm.
the experts in the field were saying, and
Hmm.
I got involved in the organization, which was at that time called the National Association for Employee Recognition. Now it's called Recognition Professionals International. Met some really skilled people, knowledgeable people there, and but the other thing that I found is I found out a lot just by listening to people. I was doing workshops, and one of the questions I asked um, people is, how do you recognize staff? What's important in terms of staff recognition? And they started telling me about it. And
Yeah.
even well as recently as my book launch earlier this week, one
Hmm.
of the activities there was I said, think of the best, give us think of the best example of staff recognition, either that you've given or that you've received.
Oh.
And I had that information written on post-it notes, and wow, there were ideas I had never thought of. So
Oh.
we're always learning. I can always learn from, I, really as a speaker, I learn more from the audience than
Yeah.
any of them learned from me.
Wow. That's really amazing. You know, when you talk about listening, obviously that that perks me up a little bit, right? So uh, maybe you can go into what aspects of listening are incorporated into, gratitude in the workplace.
Well, one of the most important gifts a manager, supervisor, a frontline leader can provide to his staff is focus on them, listen to them, listen to what they have to say, set up one-on-one meetings with people and,
Hmm.
make sure that close the door, make sure your cell phone is turned off, no interruptions, and then
Hmm.
ask a couple questions, but really listen to what that person wants to talk about, because you're going to learn a lot. One of the ways we improve retention, for example, is something called a stay interview, where we go and we ask people, what about working here do you enjoy the most?
Hmm.
Are there things that are bothering you?
Yeah.
What would prompt you to leave? And
Hmm.
then can we fix those things? But again, it's simply taking time, spending time, giving the gift of time to people
Hmm.
and using that time to listen to what they have to say.
Well, and that there's a lack of that, right? Because in the workplace, I find even with the leaders, they're so busy that most of them don't take the time to listen.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because, the book that I've just written, I mean,
Yeah,
it is written for busy leaders. I know that
yeah.
when it comes to recognition, there are two resources, important resources that
Hmm.
people don't have much
Yeah,
of, and one is time, and the other one is money.
right.
Um, in the subtitle of my first book, which was called "Thanks, Great Job," was high value, low cost staff recognition. High value in the minds of the people receiving recognition, because in
Hmm.
the end, who decides if recognition is meaningful? The recipient, not the person giving it.
That's a
And
good point.
low cost. Low cost means doesn't cost money, doesn't take a lot of time,
Yeah.
and is simple to implement.
Well, and I suppose like if you actually like with everyone being busy, if you actually take the time to spend with these employees, I think in the long run there's many benefits. Can you go into that?
Well, first of all, you get to know them as people, and that's critical.
Yeah.
One of the ways that we make recognition meaningful to people is providing recognition that is appropriate. Different
Hmm.
people need to be recognized in different ways.
Yeah.
Each of us have our own interests, hobbies, things that are important in our lives. If we can
Hmm.
somehow tie that to recognition, for example, um, if someone is about to go on a trip someplace, maybe to Europe,
Hmm.
maybe to France, say, well, maybe share some information that you have on France, or perhaps find them a guidebook and either give it to them, loan it to them, so that they can use that to plan for their trip. If someone likes to cook or likes to sail or something, maybe give them a calendar with nice sailing pictures or recipes on or something like that. So it's getting
Hmm.
to know them. The other thing we need to know about people is their recognition preference. Not everyone. In fact, I would suggest, based on feedback and surveys I've done, less than half of us want to be recognized formally in public. We'd prefer just a quiet pat on the back or a little thank you note or some simple
Hmm.
gesture, because that's somehow that seems more genuine, more sincere to us. And also, I mean, introverts aren't even going to go to events where they think they're going to be dragged up in
That's
front
right.
of a crowd to
Yeah.
be recognized.
Actually, that's a good point with that. I actually had my son, who's a Sea Cadet. He's in a leadership role, and he actually had to go to. Well, he didn't have to, but it was a paid camp, and they had to prepare these cadet leaders for the camp because they were training the younger generation, I guess you could say. And I was listening to him. He was in a meeting, a Zoom meeting, and they were talking about. Uh, Commending, certain cadets. And actually, I'm very proud of him that he said this. He says, I don't think it's a good idea to do that in public because some people might be offended by that. They think, okay, why is that person getting special treatment and not me, sort of thing? I did just as much work or whatever for the company or the Corps. And so, yeah, just him pointing out, I think it's good to do it, like he mentioned, individually instead of in public, even though there are, awards and stuff like that. But I think it's important to know that if you want that employee to really matter, it's better to do it one on one first, I think. So that's a very good point. So maybe let's go into your books that maybe give me a comparison of what your current Thanks Again book, the differences between that, like what do you talk about mostly in that book and your previous books?
Okay, well, I'll try
Hmm.
my best.
Okay.
And actually, that's something that at the point where I was writing a book proposal, that was really important to define. Um,
Mm,
what the first book, I think I describe it as more, well, it's got a lot of stories in it. It has a lot of research into it. It was
yeah,
about convincing people that recognition is important.
right.
This book has
Hmm.
taken a different approach. It has said, the people who are going to buy this book already believe in the power of staff recognition. They
Right.
don't need to be convinced. So I don't try to spend. There's a very little research in there. There are
Mhm.
no stories in there to
Mhm.
illustrate how it is. It gets you right down to business. It's divided into
Mhm.
30 themes. Each theme relates to something that you might face in terms of recognition.
Mm.
There's one theme. The first theme, and that says create a staff recognition kit. Assemble
Oh.
the tools you need to recognize people. And by
Mhm.
tools, I include ideas on how to recognize people.
Mhm.
Um, Another one is called making staff recognition a habit. And
Yes.
it's just kind of a lot of ways to develop little tricks you can use to trick yourself into making recognition a habit.
Yeah.
There's one that focuses on my number one staff recognition tool, which
Mhm.
is thank you cards. And I talk about
Oh,
how to use
yes.
thank you cards and why I don't spend so much time talking about why it's important, but how to make them more valuable to the people. As simple as rather than just leaving it on someone's desk, try mailing it to somebody's home because nobody gets a handwritten thing at home. And put a real stamp on it. The more colorful the stamp, the better.
Yeah.
There's another one talking about. You'll notice on both my books, one of the things, and even on this
Mhm.
cup that I have here, it's a replica of a post-it note.
Love it.
Well,
Love
a
it.
simple little thing. Very
Yeah.
doesn't take very long. Doesn't cost very much.
Mm.
Quick little note. Stick it to somebody's computer screen or onto their desk or something like that. Leave a message.
Mhm.
There's another chapter talking about how to write. This is one that was I not even contemplated when I wrote the first one. Is how to recognize people who work remotely. There's another one
Ah.
which talks about how recognition, think of a workplace that is diverse. Well, how do you make the workplace, how can you use recognition to create an inclusive workplace?
Right.
And there's another theme focused on what we can do on day one, or maybe even a bit earlier, to start helping that new staff member build their commitment to the organization. Because
Right.
often what happens, and I actually talk about this in the first book, though
Mhm.
in more details in terms of stories, but on the day one, you know, people start getting buyer remorse very easily if we don't do a good job of welcoming them into the organization.
Yeah.
There's chapters on, or themes, I call them, on humor, using humor effectively in recognition, how to make recognition more environmentally friendly,
Mhm.
how to assess your recognition. There's also how do we encourage peer recognition? How do we recognize our peers? And
Yeah.
even though this is written for leaders, I also included a theme about how do you recognize your boss? Because just because somebody is higher up, has moved up, been promoted, doesn't mean all of a sudden their need for recognition has disappeared.
Yeah.
But sometimes we forget that. There's also one's practices and what you shouldn't do, what you shouldn't say when you're recognizing staff.
Mhm.
And I even identify, I think, about a dozen excuses that people give for not recognizing staff. And I said, if you hear one of these excuses,
Mhm.
here's your response to it. So
Wow.
all kinds of information. But the thing is, when you pick up the book,
Mhm.
you find the theme that you want and you turn to that theme. They're all, of course, all listed in the table of contents and so on.
Wow.
And yeah, so that's basically. Oh, by the way, I had over 100 staff recognition ideas left over, so I just threw them in at the back of the book. It's a bonus section.
Oh, nice. Oh, wonderful. You touched on the thank you cards, and I did see them at the book launch, and it just made me think of, um, teachers especially. I've heard this many times again, and I still do this with my son. At Christmas time, I get him to write Christmas cards for his teachers, and this has been since kindergarten. Um, and last year, he actually did. Give one to one of his teachers, and I always ask him how did it go, and one of his teachers said, "You know that we're a sucker for cards, right? Doesn't matter what." So you were totally right about that. And I have a friend who is actually in the educational sector, and she has a drawer, a box full of cards that she's had throughout her lifetime, and she continues to save them. So there are people like her who would probably grab onto those when she's not feeling, having a good day, and just read them and know that she's made an impact on these people. And then there are people who, oh, thank you for the card, and throw it away, but I can guarantee you there's still a little bit of an effect even in that moment that they received the card, right? So I totally agree with you on the card thing. But those are wonderful ideas. My goodness. Oh, this is great. So yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to pick up on what you said. One of the things I say, and I think it's on the theme about day one, I said the first time you recognize the person, or maybe it's in the thank you card, first time you give someone a thank you note, hand them a file folder as well, and say, you might want to keep these, because there are going to be, as you said, there are going to be days when things aren't going so well. You might want to just reread those. And like the teacher you described, I don't know that I've ever discarded a thank you card. I've got a couple thank you cards. I can't read the signature, so I have no idea anymore where they came from, other than a generic. I think this came from, actually, the one I'm thinking of right now came from somebody who I supervised, and when she was leaving, she wrote me a thank you note. The other thing that you touched on is Christmas cards. Okay, so you're writing Christmas cards or something like that to staff members?
Yeah.
Don't just say, have a good Christmas.
Yeah.
Talk about one or two of the things that they do that you appreciate. Just add a little, include a little note saying, over the last, this past few months, I've noticed how you have done such and such, and really appreciate that. And the other thing is that you touched on is, one of the other themes is about recognition through the years, and I've broken it down to the 4 seasons and suggest things that would be appropriate for the different seasons.
Yeah.
For example, we're in the fall, Thanksgiving. There's nothing more related to the recognition than saying than Thanksgiving. And so, take a moment, maybe over the Thanksgiving weekend, and think about work, and, not too much about work, but think about who at work really makes a difference, who you really appreciate, and make a note to say something to them. Or in the days before and after Thanksgiving, if you're sending email to someone, add a little postscript that says, I'm thankful to be able to work with you, and then explain why. And that explanation of why is really important. We have to, we don't just say thank you for whatever you did, or just, sometimes we'd say, we appreciate you just for being there, for being you. But in recognition, we're saying, you've done something, it's a behavior we want you to see you repeat it, we're going to do that. Thank you. You talked in the introduction, you said, we're coming up to Canadian Thanksgiving. Well, Thanksgiving is so important. Why don't we celebrate both?
Yeah.
And of course, that last Thursday in November is a work day for us here in Canada, but why don't you declare it thank you Thursday? And maybe it's so good. Maybe you have one every month. Maybe even one every thank you Thursday every week.
Yeah.
So lots of things we can do. Lots of ways we can bring recognition into our, what's happening around us all the time.
Yeah, when it comes to gratitude in the workplace, it can't just be a one event only, right? One time only. It has to be continuous to help with everybody's growth, I guess you could say, and for them to thrive in the workplace, I think, right?
Yeah, I'm just coincidentally, I'm just writing an article for my blog and newsletter, and it's about, someone said to me the other day, I don't recall ever being recognized. And I doubt very much, over a decades-long career, as now a retired teacher, that this person hasn't been recognized. And in fact, I have evidence that the person has been. But two things are missing there. One, maybe how the person is recognized wasn't appropriate. And secondly, recognition didn't occur often enough. So, Gallup has a survey it does, and one of the questions on this 12 question survey is, in the last 7 days, has someone at work recognized you for something? Well, the implication of that, though they never say it in either of the books I've read from Gallup about this, they never say, we think everyone should be recognized about once a week. But you know what? It's not a bad target to go for.
That's powerful. I was just thinking as you were talking, how can we if we're going to make gratitude a habit, what would you recommend to just, every human? Uh, how can we get into the habit and start exercising it as a, almost a daily thing? Is there some kind of exercise or something that we can do so that it becomes part of our life, eventually?
Sure. There
Yeah.
are several things we can do.
Okay.
When you make that commitment,
Yeah.
perhaps you schedule time in your day and block it off and just say, during these 15 minutes, from 1:30 to 1:45 or whatever is an appropriate time, maybe at the end of the day. Actually, the end of the day is a wonderful time to just before you go home, think of something good that happened, and
Mm.
then leave a note in somebody's desk or post it or something, so they'll see it first thing in the morning, which is a great
Yeah.
way for them to get started their
Hmm.
next day started. Um, Another thing you can do is you could create accountability, make yourself accountable to someone. Whether if you have an administrative assistant, maybe that's a person. If you have a supervisor, maybe just a colleague, anybody, and somebody who's going to come to you and say, "Lady, Melody,
Hmm.
who have you recognized recently?" And just ask that question. Another little trick that I've been talking about for years is what I now call recognition rocks, and these are just
Oh.
actually, I think in the at the book launch, I actually gave someone a set of these, and it's just
Oh.
5 pebbles in a little plastic bag. Comes with the owner's manual, and the owner basically the instructions are really simple. At the beginning of the day, put 5 or 3 rocks or whatever in one pocket, and then move it to the other pocket. Every time you
Mm.
recognize someone, move one of those tokens. And by the
Mhm.
end of the day, your goal is to have moved that, all of them, whatever you start out with in your one pocket, all of them have been moved to the other pocket. Um, I used to not use rocks. I used to just use pennies. And I'd give everyone in my audience 5 pennies. And I remember this one woman comes up to me at the end of a session and she says, that was a great session, really learned a lot. I said, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that you got something. She says, yeah, now I can move one of these damn pennies. Okay, so I was helping her, I hope, create a habit.
Yeah.
Another thing is going back to thank you notes. Put a package of thank you notes right on your desk where you see them all the time. And you say to yourself, um, whenever you see that, is maybe there is somebody I should be writing a thank you note to. And you pick up your
Mm.
pen and write that thank you note. So that's it. Sometimes you want to kind of uh, s- kind of reward yourself for doing recognizing someone
Mhm.
that you say, after I spent 15 minutes recognizing people, I'll take a break, make myself a nice cup of tea, and just sit down and read my favorite mystery novel or something like that.
Yeah.
So there's, that. And that idea actually is kind of developed from Atomic Habits by James Clear. And another
Ah.
one is, and I think another one which, again, he wasn't talking about recognition per se, but the idea that you associate, you know, whenever I finish a meeting, I'll sit down and write, uh, prepare the notes, the highlights, what we accomplished, the actions that I've done that. And then
Mhm.
when I've done that, I'll think, who really contributed to that meeting? And maybe write that person a little thank you note.
Oh,
So the
those are
habit
lovely.
of is writing down the actions. The
Yeah.
new habit is to write a couple thank you note expressing appreciation for people for their contribution during the meeting.
Wow. Those are amazing. Thank you so much. I want to go into now what projects or other initiatives you have down the road or you're doing right now. I think you said you're writing another book or planning to.
I am. This one will not be about, well, if I stick with my plan, this will not be about recognition. It will be about hiring and
Oh.
conducting interviews and so on. And there's no shortage of books there.
Yeah.
Well, there's not nearly as many books about how to hire the right people as how to get
Mm.
the right job for those people who are looking for jobs. So I
Right.
think there's still a thing. But this one is going to be different because what I've done is I've said, I like, if I could write the book I really want to write, it would be a murder mystery.
Oh,
Uh,
nice.
I just don't. either I don't have a good enough imagination, or maybe I just don't lie well enough. Which a novelist I met one time says, "Oh, that's all you have to do is lie a lot."
Oh.
Okay, so what I do though is I read a lot of mysteries, and so what I want to do, what I've discovered as I read them, I say, that technique when you're looking at motive in a
Mm.
murder case. Well, that's just like what what motivates employees, what causes them to do things, what are their values.
Mm.
So what I'm going to do is take passages from from Agatha Christie or uh, the Sherlock Holmes book
Oh, yeah.
or something like that, and just
Yeah.
use those to kind of become the starting point for a short chapter about some aspects of it. Again, Herc says things like, you have to use the gray cells. Well, I can use that to remind people, it's about thinking. You have to think
Mm-hmm.
about or several, there are all kinds of examples there of detectives who ask a question of a
Yeah.
suspect or a potential suspect, and then they just wait for that person to reply.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that silence in a conversation, especially when it's an interview and you're the candidate. It just kind
Mm-hmm.
of sucks information out of people, because really what we're doing is we're looking for clues. We're gathering as much evidence. We are checking alibis by talking to references.
Wow.
So it's all, yeah. So that's where I think my next book's going to be. I
Oh,
certainly have done
great.
the research. I've got, I'm always going through it. I find something like right in front of me. I have something out of Murder is Easy, which is an
Yeah.
Agatha Christie book I just read. And
Yeah.
I just noted a passage there that, yeah, I think I might be able to use that. Now, I won't use all of them because there's just too
Mm-hmm.
many examples,
Yeah.
but I'll get the best examples. So that's where my
Wow.
next book is. Maybe.
Maybe. And you also do speaking engagements, right?
That's right. I've got, uh, yeah, I forget how many. I've got a few coming up in the new year,
Wow. Wow.
and 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 I'm always looking for more because I'm an introvert. I don't like talking. I don't
Yeah.
like speaking, but once I start, I really enjoy it. And
Oh,
the benefit for me is I get to learn. I always get an opportunity to hear from people and so on.
yeah.
Again, I'm thinking particularly of a first book. I told a story about kind of the importance of family, which is also a theme in my new book. But it took a different approach, and it was about a story I wrote about having really good service from this 50-year-old plumber um,
Mhm.
from the gas company, and I put it in my newsletter. And his boss saw it, passed it on to him. He gave it to his mother. His mother, who must have been, well, when you have 50-year-old son,
Yeah.
you probably left me a voicemail, and
Oh.
it was really powerful because she was so nervous and so nervous until she
Oh.
came to the very end, and she says, "I'm Dan's mother," and 75 or 80 years old, and she's still proud of looking for reasons to be proud of what her son has done. I told this
Yeah.
story at a teachers' convention. A woman came up to me afterwards and said, "Oh, I was showing my mother around the school on a weekend. We bumped into the principal who was there. He talked about what he liked about what I was doing in the school. And every time I say, well, maybe it's time to move on, the mother says, oh, why would you do that?
Mhm.
They love you where you are." The mother has become a staff retention ally to the
Yeah.
principal.
Isn't that you just reminded me of a event that happened to me, and I think it's important that the effects of the gratitude impact not just the person, the receiver, but obviously their families, their friends, right? And that's very powerful. Yeah, I had that happen with me. A friend of mine long ago. I was I was there for her during her darkest time, and I had ended up. This was in Calgary. I ended up coming to visit my mom here on a weekend here in Edmonton, and I said, if you need, I said to my friend, if you ever need anything, just I'll give you my mom's number to call. And she did end up calling her. And I didn't know that. I wasn't home. And my mom passed on the message. And the first thing she said was, your friend said that you're an amazing human. And so for my mother to hear that someone else thinks that her daughter is an amazing human, that was powerful to me, and I'll remember that to this day. So I love that story that you just shared. Since we're coming to a close here, I have a very important question to ask you. What matters to you? What matters to Nelson?
Well, in everything I do, in my writing and in my speaking, it really comes down to a very few words. And that is, I want to enable people, leaders, managers, supervisors, principals, whomever, I want to help them hire, engage, and retain the right people.
Yeah. Yes. That is powerful. Very powerful. Wow. Thank you, Nelson. This has been an amazing session. I look forward to many more on gratitude because, like I said, that's my mantra. I love talking about it. And I wish you a very happy Thanksgiving. Thank
And
you
the
again.
same to you. And thank you
Thank you.
for
Thank you.
inviting me onto your show.
Thank you. Thank you.